Well, let's take a closer look at the EFF's manifesto. I'm joined in studio by Tasneem Essop from the Society Work and Development Institute and public policy expert, Dr. Pooe. Thanks a lot for joining us this evening on Newsnight. Now, I'm going to start off with you, Doctor. When we're talking about the EFF's manifesto, many would say that a very charismatic, Julius, that came on stage, 7 pillars that have been articulated, but some would argue and say that, listen, this is nothing new that we've heard. We haven't heard from the EFF, apart from some of the rhetorics around, deputy ministers being removed, but really it's almost even similar as that of the ANC's manifesto.
It is in certain parts, but I think, like you're saying, the key issue would be what really does differentiate them. I think I had a chance to read, I think the document's about
170 pages.
170, which seems a bit, though, an overkill for a manifesto, but we can't, look, it's good to give us detail. But the key thing that really, if I had to just summarize it, it's the issue of where does the money come from? Because a lot of it is based on the fact that there seems to be a taxation system. I think the CIC touched on it to say, listen, we might have to raise corporate taxes, but then, for me, it doesn't quite take into the factor in the fact of the global economy at the moment that, listen, South Africa is no longer that special child on the continent. If I as an investor really want to think about it, why don't I just go towards Rwanda where I know it's a bit more stable? So it's great. I mean, you can never fault the party for giving a broad vision, which is what they do, but I think it's the details, and I think it's a bit of an overkill. Had they just maybe really just focused on those 7 cardinal pillars and said, listen, if we get in, this is what we're going to focus on, I think it would have been much better.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about this issue around where the money is going to come from, Tasneem, many would say that it almost sounded like a very Robin Hood-inspired manifesto. You're taking from the rich, you're giving to the poor, but the very same rich need to be able to contribute to the economy so that everybody can benefit.
But I think partly what the EFF is talking about here is some really fundamental economic changes. And I think that needs to be factored into how we talk about where the money will come from if the EFF ever is in government. I think now it's also a case of they're not in government. It's unlikely that they will be in the next 6 months. And theirs is really to say, what is our ideological position, what are our policy positions, and what will we push for as an opposition party at government?
Let's talk about ideology. The ideological policies that want to be pushed in government does not necessarily mean that these are the realities that will be confronted should they ever be in government. So are they selling us pie in the sky, so to say? And just because they're coming from an opposition standpoint and theirs is to inspire and motivate and get some more votes?
Well, I think elections are a time where every party sells us pie in the sky, effectively. And yes, they are. Some of the things that they're saying are going to be unachievable, right? But I'm more sympathetic to opposition parties who lay out that vision. Of course, I do agree theirs is a bit excessive at points in this manifesto. There's a lot of little points in it that probably didn't need to be there. But I do sympathize with them setting out that vision, and I think it's good for voters to know what is their position going into the big policy questions at an election.
I mean, talking about some of those positionings, I mean, one of them is an issue around free education. We're looking at housing, quality health care, etc. Going back to the issue around where the money is going to come from. And obviously, it's around the protected industrial development. On the other side is the nationalization of mines as well as banks, etc. We've seen this rhetoric about nationalizing. And unfortunately, when it comes to our state-owned enterprises currently, they don't exactly bode well for a litmus test on how effective a state-run corporation or entities will fare in South Africa.
I'm one of those, I think I'm quite sympathetic to the concept of state-owned. If you actually look at our state-owned entities, I think if you count everything, including the provincial and local, it comes to around 283. The issue is not so much the concept of state-owned entity, it's the issue of governance. I think you just have to look at the issue of the PIC. If anything, there's an intellectual, Farid, I think it's Farid Kharija, he's normally on another network. He always says the point that if you actually look at where the Chinese are going and you look where the East is going, that's where development is going. But the concepts of what the economy is going to look like in the future is so large that you can't just leave it to the private sector. So where I think the EFF, if they were really nuanced, they would have said, listen, what we really need is a state-owned entity, which is actually looking at what can we pick in the 4th Industrial Revolution, issues such as data, issues such as mega infrastructure for that. Why can't we have a state-owned entity just looking at teaching people that into our schools? So I think it's an issue of where, this is where I think they and the ANC get stuck in the old way of doing things. The concept of a state-owned entity is not that you keep Telkom forever. It's an issue of saying, oh my word, as the economy is becoming dynamic, what in the economy can we take for the state for the greater good? So I think that's what's missing, not the concept. There's nothing wrong with the concept of state-owned entity. South Africa has shown the issue is the governance. Just remember, I think, 10 years back when Dr. Rilkoza was still the chairperson of Eskom, it had money, it had reserves. What had happened? It's not that Eskom changed in any way. The fundamental issue that changed in Eskom.
The leadership and the management of those funds thereof. But let's talk about this leadership and management management of those funds? Because he was quite clear around what happens to corrupt public servants, and he was saying that they should not get any less than 20 years should they be found guilty of corruption. And I cannot help but have thought at that moment in time and thought, well, it's a little bit hypocritical. I mean, there's still allegations tabled against some EFF members, Flochibambo being one of them, around VBS Bank. So they're not exactly the kids that are squeaky clean when it comes to issues of this nature.
Well, also, even if you look beyond, or further back than just the EFF, when these leaders of the EFF were in the ANC and the allegations that came up around there. So I agree, but the problem that the EFF is faced with now is that they've been, since 2014, really the anti-corruption crusaders, right? They've joined onto that whole, group who was really campaigning against corruption in the state. And what's ended up happening is now, as allegations, small or big, and some of them have been quite small, come out against them, it starts to taint that. If they weren't in that anti-corruption crusade that they were on, they might have actually fared better now. But because of where they position themselves, they
it almost sounds hypocritical.
Yes, and I mean, that's the point, right? They'll say, oh, but you're looking at us and not at everyone else and so on. And that's what I'm saying. Even the smallest story that comes out about the EFF when it comes to corruption is going to be a big one because of where they've positioned themselves.
And I do not want to undermine or even underestimate the vote in this, but you and I and the three of us are sitting in the studio, and we're analyzing this entire speech and manifesto intellectually, as we're about to do with other political entities. I'm talking about the masses now. Are the masses sitting down and critically evaluating some of those issues? In other words, if a Julius Malema, for example, says and articulates issues around corruption, do they go in and go, okay, objectively look at the EFF's manifesto, the stance on corruption, go, but hang on, aren't these the very same people that were linked to VBS Bank, as well as the billions were stolen from people, ordinary people, the very same ordinary people that they're advocating for?
Again, going back to research, actually, it's a very weird fact that when voters actually go in to vote, issues such as corruption and, let's say, personal temptations of leaders actually doesn't figure that much into it, because people are thinking of the broader thing. To say, listen, most people at an objective level tell you all politicians are corrupt. It's not anything new, but the key issue they ask is, which devil do we choose? Now, I think South Africa, everybody would like to get to the level where you say, listen, you don't have to choose a devil. But then the question we have to answer to people is to say, where is the angel? Because it would seem as though when we look at South African politicians, it's actually it's still foot and mouth, as in you pay the politician will get you something. So I think maybe it speaks to
politics of the stomach still governing politics in this way. But then are we even able to transcend from politics of the stomach to politics where people actually are serving the people, and the EFF, being the opposition party, will be one of those parties that want to serve, of saying, give us the chance and opportunity for us to lead so we can create a better system?
You know, I mean, I don't claim to speak or have enough knowledge on what, in terms of mass research on what the masses are thinking. But it is my opinion that people do think very critically about our political system and about the political parties that they vote for. I think that these will be part of the reflections that people make. And a lot of the disillusionment that we see around times of elections shows some of that, right? People not voting, people saying that they have difficulty choosing a party to vote for. Those aren't things that we should ignore, right? Yeah. That's part of people saying, well, yes, some of us are disillusioned with that system, and I think we really need to focus on that in this coming election season, as well as, the broader electoral points that we always discuss.
I want us to look at the tone of this manifesto, because, I mean, we've been articulating different aspects, and we'll go into, what he said about Pan-Africanism and some of those issues that were tabled, including, corrupt-free government, no deputy ministers. But when we look at the overall tone of this, many would say that it probably resonates with the people more simply because of the manner in which it was delivered. Now, Julius is known to be quite charismatic, is a charismatic individual who does not necessarily mince his words. And when you look at the state this afternoon, it was flooded with young people. Does that mean that youth vote that he's looking for, those 16-year-olds, as he articulated in the manifesto, that he wants those 16-year-olds to vote for, are they starting to sort of align themselves with some of the values, align themselves with some of the policies of the EFF?
I think that was very hard, because if you look at, the IEC's numbers which are coming in, there's still a large majority of, I think, as a guest has said, a majority of youth people who still haven't actually registered. So it's an issue of saying, listen, it's one thing for me to go to a stadium to get a free T-shirt, to listen in, to be part of the hoopla. It's another thing for me to go say, listen, I can now translate this into an actual vote. The mistake, this same mistake was made by Hillary Clinton. There was an assumption that she got all these young people to come out, and only to find that, no, young people were not really that interested. So I think it's an issue of saying they shouldn't really count the chickens before they hatch. It's who knows what happens when a 16-year-old becomes a 17-year-old. The thinking of humanity is so complex and dynamic that I don't think there is one party that's a monopoly on youth.
Yeah, and then obviously looking at the fact that low-income groups are the big focus and the major focus of this manifesto, talking about petrol attendants, how much they should earn, mine workers, 12,500, and so on and so forth. But when we're talking about that resonating with the masses, and a significant portion of our workers and the working class, they are earning below that line. Obviously, he's tabled the issue around the basic minimum wage, but saying that it was not enough and having his own version of what wages should look like in South Africa. Does that not then resonate with an ordinary South African saying, you know what, if I vote for this Julius Malema, I'm going to start earning 12,500 Rand a month or 5,000 instead of maybe the 2,000 that I'm earning, where we're actually supposed to be earning 3,500?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The figures that he was talking about don't come out of fresh air. Also, a lot of them come from struggles that have been ongoing. If you look at the 12,500 for mine workers, that immediately relates to the strike around the time of 2012, the Marikana massacre, where mine workers began demanding 12,500. And in other sectors too, there have been various demands made around what is a living wage, right? So I think Malema is also, and the EFF is also picking up on that and those kind of sentiments. And of course, I mean, we know that the majority of South Africans live under grinding poverty, and that is going to resonate on some level. Of course, a lot of other things will also resonate and other things won't, right? And that will all be factored into how people make their decision around who to vote for.
Now, Doc, I must ask you the question. Having listened to the speech, having read some of those 170 pages of the manifesto, would you say that the likelihood of the EFF becoming the main opposition party come these elections is much higher than what we anticipated? Or are we going to see a situation where the DA actually takes it come the elections?
The difference that I have to cover, looking at the 2014 results, is 2.2 million votes. Now, I know they said they've grown their membership over the last 5 years to 2 million. But the thing is, it's rarely in South Africa do you find a party, especially a party that's come in the second time round, do well. If anything, if you look at the UDM and if you look at COPE, second time round in national elections, they actually tend to go a bit down. Now, what the EFF is projected to do is grow, but will they now become the second opposition to cover 2.2 million votes? It's a stretch. But hey, look, it's a party, miracles do happen, so why not?
It's a diverse economy, it's a diverse country. Thank you so much to the both of you for joining us this evening on Newsnight, shedding some light into